Hi, it's Andy. Let's say you're sitting in a meeting tomorrow for a project that you are leading. Okay. You're looking to get sign off, and based on the pre meetings that you had with key stakeholders, this meeting ought to go pretty smoothly. But seemingly out of the blue, a key stakeholder speaks up and starts sharing objections. And right there in front of everyone, which includes your boss, by the way, things are starting to derail, and you can feel some anger starting to build up. If we could see a thought bubble over you, it might be saying, I can't believe they're sabotaging this. They didn't bring any of this up when we talked to them about it before the meeting. They're throwing me and the project under the bus. You know what? That's a key leadership moment right there. Your specific situation tomorrow or in the weeks ahead might be different, but the key issue is this. How do we respond? How do we navigate the emotional roller coaster of leading teams and projects? And how about this? Families and friendships. Our ability to do that can make an enormous difference in our careers and our life. Now, you've heard of emotional intelligence, right? I mean, you know it's important, but a lot of us haven't had formal training on the topic, or maybe it's been a while. So today I'm excited to introduce you to Joshua Friedman, author of the international best-selling book, At the Heart of Leadership: How to Get Results with Emotional Intelligence. There are plenty of books that can give you an academic understanding of emotional intelligence, but Joshua's book is immensely practical. It focuses on how to help us navigate situations like that project meeting, because our lives are filled with situations where the stakes are high with our emotions. And Joshua's here to help us with that. I can't wait to share the discussion with you. Hey, before we start, do you know someone who's in college or maybe recently graduated? Some people at that stage, they know exactly what they want to do with their career, but I've seen a growing number of people who dread being asked the question, so what's your career plan? And when it comes to their career, the truth is they have no freaking idea. And I bring this up because we have a new course entitled just that, No Freaking Idea: How to Navigate Career Uncertainty. It's a career guide for people who are struggling with uncertainty about what they want to do. And just like we're often not taught about emotional intelligence when we're growing up, we're often not taught how to build a career plan. And that's what this course does. And the feedback has been fantastic. Whether you enroll to help you think through next steps in your career, or you want to gift a license to a son or daughter or someone else you know, learn more by going to nofreakingidea.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Thanks. Well, let's jump into today's discussion with Joshua about the new fourth edition of his book, At the Heart of Leadership. Joshua, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
I'm glad to be here, Andy. And your introduction, I'm just like, oh, I've been in that meeting.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take you back in that meeting in about 10 minutes because we're going to talk about it. But, we'll get into the ideas of the book. But before we do, I'd like to ask you this. Was there anything in your family culture growing up or early experiences that provided a clue or maybe influenced the fact that you'd now be one of the most influential voices on emotional intelligence?
I think we teach what we need to learn. And so my influence was sort of anti-emotional intelligence. My parents were both statisticians. My stepdad was a retired naval officer and computer consultant back in the day when computers filled a room, and emotions were, I don't know, not something we talked a lot about.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I would say my dad, he was probably considered a gruff guy, although age mellowed him. But there was often this sense of what I learned about emotions was don't get him upset or, just emotions. Now, we had plenty of joy too. Like, sometimes if I go to like a men's retreat and they're like, what's your daddy doing? Like, I don't remarkably have them. We have a great relationship, but I didn't feel like there was a lot of really learning about how emotions work, which my wife's family was quite different. I mean, they just have it out in front of by dinner, they were all fine. And I was like, by the end of dinner, they're all fine. I'm like, what just happened here? So it is interesting how different family cultures will shape who we are. But yeah, it's interesting. When did it, you used the term, I think, unlocked in the book. When was it that it kind of got unlocked for you, where you're like, I just feel like I'm understanding this more?
I'm still working on it, Andy, but there was a moment when I was a teacher, and in the school where I taught, they didn't call it emotional intelligence. The term didn't exist back then, but they taught these skills. And when I first saw that, I'm like, oh, that's not for me. I'll just stick to academic subjects. But I remember going to the principal, who is now the president of the organization I lead, many, many years later, and saying to her, Annabelle, I think I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed, and I might be depressed. I don't know. I'm like, and I was expecting her to say, oh, well, don't worry, Josh, you're fine. Right? Because that's what we're sort of trained to do.
Sure.
And she said something radically different. She said, oh, tell me more. So I told her more. And then she said, oh, that's so interesting. Well, maybe that's the right feeling for you for right now. I'm like, wait, what?
Said nobody ever.
It's nobody ever. It's like, what? Maybe just let yourself be stressed and depressed for a few days. See what happens. And then if you need help getting out of it, let me know. And I walked out and I'm like, wow, that is really weird and wonderful. And so I started experimenting with that as a teacher and just acknowledging my students like, oh, okay, that's fine. So that's what's going on. All right, interesting. Yeah. So now what else? And I found it completely changed my relationship with my students. So then I'm like, oh, I got to try this with other people. Right. So that was really a pivotal piece for me. And I remember now it's about over 30 years ago that conversation happened. And I can still feel that sense of validation and I don't know, being okay and that I could do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that backstory here. Everyone listening to us, they've heard of emotional intelligence likely and some appreciation for its importance. But I'm curious, what are some examples of myths or misconceptions about emotional intelligence that you come across? And then I'd love for you to give your definition of it.
Well, one of the biggest myths is that it's like being nice or being polite or kind of social skills. And it's an intelligence. So intelligence, like you can have mathematical intelligence and you can use it in lots of different ways. Emotional intelligence could help you be nice, but it could also help you be more direct, more clear, set firmer boundaries. And then like empathy is a classic one where I get a lot of leaders saying, well, if I'm empathic, then people are going to run over me. It's like, okay, well, that's not really what empathy is. That's a different thing. And so let's talk about what empathy really is. And you can, you're firing people. You can do that and they walk away and go, I hate that jerk. Or they walk away going, wow, that was really tough. But, Andy really stood by me and did his best for me. At least I feel, dignity and respect in our relationship. So I think we kind of smush all these things together, like, social skills or being nice or just friendliness, or sometimes people even think about extroversion and think that that's emotional intelligence. But I think that if we can break it down and really pay attention to what it means to be intelligence, what intelligence really means, and how emotions play into that, we get something really good. And one of my colleagues, David Crusoe, in an interview with me one time said, a lot of people think about being heart, like we have a convention of head over heart.
Right.
And so then they think, oh, emotional intelligence is going to be heart over head. And it's not.
Right. It's
about heart and head. And I would just add hands really working together.
Yeah. I feel like, I don't think it was ever stated to me like this, but that emotional intelligence was about managing negative emotions. I feel like the implication, if not explicitly stated, is that a misconception you see sometimes?
Yeah, I hear a lot of times people do a lot of shoulding about feelings. Well, I shouldn't be angry, or I shouldn't feel this, or I shouldn't feel that. And just circling back to my story, this notion of saying, okay, the emotion is data. It's here for a reason. It's I like the adaptive theory of emotion, which kind of comes from the Darwin tradition, looking at like animals have emotions. There's a functional reason for emotions, and they're part of our survival mechanism. They're part of how we're wired, and it's not that like some emotions are negative and positive. Actually, they're all messages to help us navigate through opportunities and threats.
I kind of took it from the book, whether it's your formal definition or not, but it is your ability to integrate thinking and feeling. So it's integrating them so we can make optimal decisions. That's ultimately, isn't that along the lines of the theme of your book?
Absolutely. And the even simpler definition, being smarter with feelings. They're there. You can be dumb about it, like most of us have been a lot, or you can be smarter.
On our best days, we're good. But
right? And having them work together. So that integration, like feeling about thinking, thinking about feeling, it's not like, oh, you have to obey every feeling, but you also don't have to ignore every feeling.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to emotions in the workplace, I feel like some often referred to statements in business anyway are things like, hey, let's leave emotion out of it. Or, he's overly emotional, or hey, stick to the facts, those sorts of things. And I feel like one of the big messages of your book is that emotions are assets. So I'd love for you to explain what you mean by that, and maybe an example of how an emotion was an asset to you recently, if you're willing to do that.
Sure. So we'll just first, you notice in those conversations where somebody says, hey, let's just be rational.
Yeah, right.
There's often like a real edge in their voice, right? Like there's a lot of emotion.
Ironically.
Yeah. So the idea that, who doesn't, especially in the space of like managing people and projects, who wouldn't like data about what's really going on? Who wouldn't like data about where is their alignment and misalignment? And wouldn't you like to have a dashboard that told you who's fully bought in?
Yeah.
Right? And who's just saying they're bought in, and then out in the hallway they're like, can you believe this guy? Right? Emotions like trust, it's a pretty simple example. Trust is an emotion. And we probably talk about trust a lot in this world of project management. We might even, use a phrase like buy-in and think buy-in is somehow rational, but of course it's emotional. Right? Do you feel bought in?
Right.
Do you feel trust?
Right.
So those data points start to tell us, where do I stand in relation? Where do other people stand? Where is do we have each other's back? And we're pack animals. And as pack animals, we have this visceral, immediate, deep tuning in to who's got my back, right? Am I at the edge am I at the edge and going to get eaten by the wolves, or am I kind of connected with the pack?
That's good.
And so it's a matter of survival for us, but it's also a matter of thrival. And how do we connect and support each other to grow? So when we think about leaving emotions out of it at work, that's what we've done. And we've left out wonder, we've left out commitment, we've left out loyalty, we've left out joy. We've left out all of these emotions that fuel innovation and change and problem solving, connection and collaboration, because we're afraid of feelings like loneliness or fear. We're afraid of those feelings. Ironically, it's, the feeling driving that decision to leave out feelings. And we're afraid of those because we don't understand them. And I certainly didn't. Yeah. And 30 years ago, if I was in a meeting, and somebody's like got this expression on their face, like, oh, I can see there's something really up. 30 years ago, I would be like, oh, I hope that person doesn't open their mouth. I better ignore the heck out of this. Don't catch their eyes.
No eye contact, exactly. I'm with you on that. Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. Once again, I don't think I was ever taught this, but I've had this unwritten sense that some emotions are good and some are bad. So, for example, fear and anger seem to me, if I wouldn't have read your book, and I suppose maybe I could have surmised, but I think in practice, I would say they are objectively bad. but then I read your book, and that's not necessarily true. So let's say someone listening to us is maybe fearful about an upcoming presentation that they have to make, or maybe it's a job interview that's going on, right? So we'll talk more about the 6 seconds process or the 1, 2, 3 KCG process in a bit. But for now, how is the emotion of fear, let's say, an asset?
So fear tells us something I care about is at risk. What do you care about? What's the risk? Right? And the problem is when we don't use that intelligently, we might move into paralysis, we might overreact, we might be reacting to the wrong thing. But if we can really be clear, well, what is important to me here? And what is the risk? And if I could be clear about that, I'll prepare in a much better way. And if I really know what is at stake, then I'm going to protect that and not protect my ego or not protect, being right or not. Like, what really matters here? And so fear, only occurs when we care about something. Right? You drop a piece of paper that's got no value on you're walking across the street and you drop it. You're like, oops, that was not good. I just littered. But, you're not really afraid. You drop $100 bill and you're like, oh, I hope nobody comes. Like, let me grab that, right? That fear is because we care. So if you reframe that fear and you say, okay, this is a message from me. I'm going to this presentation. I'm going to this interview, whatever it is. I feel something. And it might be fear. It may be worry or anxiety or like uncomfortableness. Like the word fear is a little loaded for people. Some people are afraid of the word fear. So we can dial it back to like, okay, I feel a little anxious about this, which is a variation on fear. That's telling me something I care about is at risk. The bigger the feeling, the more you care, and or the bigger the risk is. So like now all of a sudden it's like, wow, okay, this is about what's important.
Right.
And I'm going to tune in to what matters and not get distracted by the stuff that's not so important.
That's good. It's a whole different way of looking at it. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that. Let's learn about the process by going through a scenario. So, the 1, 2, 3 KCG. You can test me on how well I read the book, but the K would be the no. There's a step where I have to know kind of what's going on. I get to choose, and then I get to give. And so in the intro, I shared a scenario. So let's work with that. So remember, we've got this listener who's got a meeting tomorrow, and it seems like they're getting sabotaged unexpectedly. The stakeholder does it, and so let's take it from 2 angles. Okay, so let's say you and I, or let's go with the listener. They are that person there. Let's first say, what are some of the worst things they could do? So it's just to kind of see that angle. And then let's start with the K of the no. Like, how could they use that? But let's contrast them.
So there's so many bad things to do in that moment, right? But basically move into reaction.
Right.
Now, this is a place where some people are going to be like, see, you're saying emotions are bad. Don't get emotional. It's not what I'm saying. A reaction it's not about what you're feeling. It's about what you're doing. And when you start saying, what the hell are you talking about, in this meeting, that's not a feeling. That's an action. Yeah. So let's be clear about the difference between feelings and actions. And you might become volatile. You might shut down. You might run away, you might attack, basically fight, flight, and freeze, right? You might be like, I can't think anymore. Any of those kind of reactions are obviously going to sabotage the heck out of your meeting and your future career since your boss is in the room. So somehow we need to navigate this complexity. And I think what a lot of us have learned is, I'm feeling something, this is uncomfortable, I better push that discomfort away. Right? And just shut it down.
Yeah.
And that's a coping strategy that can sort of work. But all of a sudden, like everybody sees it on your face and like you're not actually dealing with it. Right. And it starts coming out sideways. And that's just not gonna go well. So I'm not saying that we're going to necessarily take action on every feeling. We're not going to necessarily go in depth in every feeling. But when you have this feeling and it's telling you something, this is an opportunity for you to say, oh, something's going on. Right? And I thought the world was one way, and it turns out maybe I was wrong. I might not be. This guy may have been on board. This person might have been on board. But there's something unexpected happening here. And I think I sometimes use the metaphor of a machine overheating. And if you are working with any kind of machine, whatever, in your car or in a manufacturing plant or, whatever, the machine starts overheating, it would be very, very stupid to say, I'm just going to ignore that.
All right.
Right? It's like the little light starts blinking red. You start hearing this warning sound.
Crank it up. No.
I'm just going to ignore it. I'm just going to pretend that's not happening. Right. No, let's not do that. So this emotion is like that. It's like this warning signal. Something's happening. Now you have the opportunity to just try to move past it and ignore it. Or you have the opportunity to say, maybe I ought to tune into that little red light blinking. And if I'm going to tune into the red light blinking, my first step is to say, which dial on my dash, I got all these dials here. Which light is blinking? Right? And what is this data? So if we're going to treat intelligence is about accurately acquiring information and then using that information to solve problems. Yeah. Mathematical intelligence, we do that with mathematical data and mathematical puzzles. Emotional intelligence, we do it with emotional data and emotional puzzles. So in this meeting, you've got an emotional puzzle, which is that you thought this person was on board and now you're not sure if they really are. That's an emotional puzzle. So what's the data? Step one, is to notice your own feeling and go, hey, what's going on here? I'm feeling something. And I'm feeling something in response to what's going on in this room. What is it? What's up right now? And tuning into that is going to help you, tuning into your own feeling, it's going to help you get some clues. How important is this? Is this really a threat? What am I reacting to? Why is my blood feel like it's about to start boiling? Mm-hmm. What's going on for me? And that can be invisible. It's not like you're doing anything or saying anything. You're just taking this moment to notice and say, okay, I'm starting to react to something. What is it? What am I feeling? What is that pushing me to do?
Mm-hmm. I don't remember you saying in the book, although maybe you did. The name of your company is 6 Seconds. I kind of assumed that means this doesn't have to take 6 minutes or 6 hours. It could take literally 6. Is that the heritage of the term?
Could take 6 seconds.
Yeah. So it's this sense of, and the reason why I wanted to even just focus on only this, and we'll get to the other steps, but I feel like in my 6 seconds there earlier in my career, I would be catastrophizing, the project is doomed, and then I'm going to lose my job, and it just turns into this downward swirl. And even if I suppress it, like you said, it's going to leak out of me one way or the other. And it's like, what if I was more like, something else is going on, and what comes out is, tell me more. let's talk more about that. But if we don't do that first step, we could so easily misdiagnose it and make it worse, right?
Yeah, and it may be the solution is tell me more. It may be the solution is to shut it down. It may be the solution is change the subject. It might be, to confront it. It's not like there's an emotionally intelligent way to behave. Mm-hmm. Just like there's not one way to solve a math problem.
I like it.
Right? So we're going to approach the problem intelligently, kind of eyes open, instead of just reacting.
That's good.
And that's the red part of the model. It's red for stop. Mm-hmm. So you said KCG, know, choose, give. Yeah. They're color coded. Yeah. Blue is the know yourself. Blue is like reflecting pool. Red is stop, to choose yourself. Choose intentionally. Don't just react. Yeah. And that, for a lot of us, I think, is the place where we have maybe the biggest. Well, I have a lot of challenges sometimes because when I start, I might notice the feeling and I'm like, yeah, but I still want to yell at this guy. right? And
Maybe. Yeah.
so slowing down, it's red for, a stop sign, slowing down and go, wait a minute, I have options. There are a lot of options of what I could do next.
Yeah. Now, earlier, I said they're feeling fearful. And you, I think, really wisely said, but there's other words there we could use. And the reason I bring this up is I think one of the challenges of the no step is emotional literacy. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like we don't have the vocabulary to do this well. So how do you like to help people improve their emotional literacy?
So I told you earlier, I came from this very rational family. And so I've approached this from a very rational perspective. I've gotten curious about the neuroscience of emotion. I've gotten curious about theories of emotion and just expanding my vocabulary. I've read there are 3,000 words for feelings in English. And I think most of us use, 5, fine, bad, good.
Do Italians have more? Yeah.
But there are a lot of different models, and we have a really cool model on our website. I'll share the link with you, which is an interactive feeling wheel. And you can click around and you go, what does this mean? What does this mean? And it's organized into 8 petals of a kind of flower.
It's a beautiful picture in the book, by the way. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, and this kind of diagram. And in the book, I got into really explaining like what these petals mean and why we have these. But just as a starting point, there are 8 times 3 emotions there, emotion words there, and then there are 8 combinations. So I believe that's 32 words. That's going to be a little, for a lot of us, that's going to take us, like double or triple our normal vocabulary. And I just started like, what, like words like vexing. I feel vexed. Like I started to enjoy learning about different feeling words and kind of going, well, what is this made out of? Oh, disappointment. That's not on this wheel. So what is it made out of? Well, disappointment, there's something about like not being able to move forward. That's kind of connected to anger, but also maybe some sorrow because it's not like I was hoping we could do this and we can't. So just kind of decoding and thinking about it almost like a set of paints. You've got these like 8 basic emotions. They're different theories, but this particular one is 8 basic emotions. So 8 colors, and you can paint anything you want by combining them. And then likewise, you can look at this kind of interesting color and go, oh, I bet that's got some of this and some of this. So applying a really logical perspective has helped me realize that they're not just random.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember that jealousy was in the petal. So, but based on what I just heard you say, you can maybe go, well, that's kind of like this. And that kind of, so where would jealousy, based on your understanding of the model, kind of show up?
So I think I'm tempted to like grab the model on my desk
me
here,
too.
but, I think jealousy has some anger in it because it's like there's a question in jealousy about like, do I deserve this? Does that person deserve this? Did they work for that? Am I working for it? I think there's some disgust because it's like, why they got all those, all that. And that disgust is a message of rules violated. And then there's maybe something about there's some wanting. So maybe that's anticipation. Because like if I really don't, if I look at somebody who's got a big house and I'm like, oh, I really want a big house, then I might feel jealous. But if I don't care about a big house, I'm not going to be jealous. So there's some kind of desire element. I think maybe anticipation would go in there.
I like it. And this whole idea is if we can get more like hooks to hang these emotions on, it's easier to go. It's not just fear. It's not just, sad, right? There's these other sort of feelings and that literacy. I think we all win if we can do that. So let's say our listener, they passed that version part of your class. So they read the book and they put some names or labels to the emotions they're feeling.
And by the way, that, naming the feeling, that's an example of emotional intelligence. It's about bridging that cognitive part of our brain for language and the affective or emotional part of our brain for that felt experience. And when we do that, when we build that bridge, it's like, oh, I get what this is.
Yeah. when our daughter, who just turned 14, but when she joined our family through adoption, had some anger issues. And I'll tell you, the therapist we were working with, I thought this is the most ridiculous question. She goes, when you feel like that, what kind of animal do you feel like? And I'm thinking, this is a stupid question. But she said, I like a dinosaur. And it's like, well, what's that dinosaur's name? And so then they had this vocabulary that they could refer to, and it gave her power over it. Oh my goodness, Joshua, I'm like, this was brilliant, and I so discounted it. But by getting a name or a label to the emotion, then I'm like, okay, I'm being Tyrannosaurus Andy right now, or whatever. So time to back off. Isn't that brilliant, really, when you think about it?
It is. And a metaphor, the word metaphor literally means to carry across.
Yeah.
And so what we do with metaphor is we carry across from one part of our brain to another.
I like it.
And this is very geeky, but there's this whole area called synesthesia in emotions research, which is about how we use multiple senses together. And so almost anybody listening hears Tyrannosaurus Andy, and they've got a picture in their head, and they're like, I don't want Tyrannosaurus Andy in my meeting.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. That I didn't know that. I would have thought bridge or whatever, but I love that, to carry across. That's really good. I like it. So let's say our listener, they've not only named it, they also recognize this is a pattern. I've seen this movie. I know how it ends, And so the next step is to choose. And I know you mentioned watch for patterns, right? So I interpret the choose as just us thinking, well, wait, what are my options? Mm-hmm. And one of the things you talk about is, I seem to call it consequential thinking, or monitoring our hit back first impulse. Mm-hmm. So would you explain that, and kind of, how this might work out for our listener to kind of think it through?
Yeah. So when we follow our patterns, we're on autopilot. Mm-hmm. Right? And I don't know, I assume everybody is experienced this, where you're driving and you're listening to the, whatever Google voice, and you're just kind of like driving. It's like, turn left, turn right, and you're just kind of going, and you don't really notice where you are. Yeah. So when we're on autopilot, it's great when we're in a predictable environment, and things are just sort of going along fine. But what if a kid runs in the street? Like, okay, this is not a good moment for autopilot. What if there's construction? And the GPS didn't know about it. This is going to be a problem with our autopilot. So when we have unexpected stuff going on, or when we're trying to go someplace new, and I think a lot of us are, as we're managing people and projects, we're trying to do something a little different than what we did last year. That's why they hired us, right? Like, our mandate is to make some change. And so we're in this place of some novelty, and following the old patterns is not going to bring us to new places.
Yeah.
So if you are 100% satisfied with where your patterns got you last time, ignore this and just follow the patterns. Mm-hmm. But if those patterns are like, that was a little suboptimal, then maybe it's time to say, okay, let me switch the autopilot off. And this first step is to stop and say, okay, I'm reacting. That was the know yourself part. And then stop and say, wait, where is this going to lead? If I follow this pattern, my typical pattern is, when I think somebody's undermining me, I rip them apart, right? And the hit back first. It's like, I'm not going to let that person get another word. Like, well, if you'd read the brief, you would know, and it's like, put them in their place. Yeah. Now, for some people, so that's like the fight response. For some people, it might be, when I think somebody's undermining me, I hurt myself first so that they can't hurt me more. Yeah, you know what? I know that I didn't really understand the situation, and maybe somebody else will have a better idea. I was just trying to get some ideas out here, but I could be totally wrong. Oh, you've just shot yourself at least in the foot, right? Like, that's not going to work. Or the flee. Like, literally flee is like, I gotta go, right? Or metaphorically flee, where you kind of just get in that shutdown mode, like, deer in the headlights, right? Mm-hmm. So those automatic unconscious reactions, they are maybe not going to get you where you want to go. And so this applying consequential thinking is saying, is this going to take me where I want to go? Now, I think a lot of people in this audience, a lot of our listeners today are used to looking at consequences from a kind of logical perspective. You know, okay, well, if we have this decision tree, we have this whatever flow, whatever system you're using, you know if you hit this and you don't hit this, then this might happen. You're probably used to thinking about that from a kind of material perspective or budget perspective or project step perspective. What about people's feelings? What about your own feelings? If you follow this pattern, what's going to happen to your emotional capital? What's going to happen to your influence? What's going to happen to trust in the room? What's going to happen to the level of willingness to ask questions next time? What's going to happen to the level to which people will be honest with you or you can be honest with them? So as we start getting into that kind of consequences, I bet a lot of you are like, don't know if I want to go there. But look, you can. It's not going to be that scary. You're going to get better at this really, really quickly. And you're going to be able to start looking at these kind of predictive models of emotion and saying, well, I need to grow trust. And therefore, I can't follow that old pattern.
Yeah. And like you said, with practice, that can start becoming a little bit more natural. And our best days, maybe we do it, but it's on those worst days, in these situations of like I really appreciate like Stephen Covey was very influential in my early career. And you mentioned him and Viktor Frankl commentary about the gap between stimulus and response. And really this process is how to do that, really.
Yeah. Expand that gap.
Yeah,
the space between stimulus and response. Let's zoom into that. Let's turn it into 6 seconds so we really get a little bit of breathing room in there and go, I'm going to make an intentional choice in this moment.
Yeah. For me, the give step was not quite as obvious, but after going through the chapter, I can okay, yeah. So for example, empathy is part of it. Could you tell us how maybe the give step could apply to this situation?
Yeah, this is really about what do you really want? And in that choose step, we're kind of looking at this moment. I'm going to stop and make a choice for this moment. But where's that going to go? How do you decide? Like once you move out of reaction, you realize, oh, I actually have 20 options of what I could do in this moment. How do I pick one? And so we use the term give yourself because it's shifting us out of ego. It's shifting us out of being right. It's shifting us out of proving something. And sometimes in business, it's easier to use the term self-direction. So if know yourself is self-awareness, choose yourself is self-management, give yourself is self-direction. My favorite, our team in China told me they changed the translation of give yourself. They couldn't find a Chinese character that they really liked. And so the characters they ended up choosing literally mean connecting beyond yourself.
That's good.
And so if you think about it in terms of empathy, let me connect beyond my own emotions. And then the other piece in this is purpose. Connecting beyond this moment. What's really important for me in my career, in the long term, but also just in life? Who do I want to be? And a few years from now, when we look back at this meeting and somebody's talking about this meeting and they say, oh, JC in that meeting, remember when somebody started to throw them under the bus and JC was like, oh, that's so interesting. It seems like there's something we haven't figured out here. We need to stop for a minute and figure it out. That really stuck with me because they were so blank, fill in the blank. They were so what? This is about legacy, but it's also the lever that you need in this moment because it's hard to do this. And like we don't like we can do really hard things when we have a clear why. Right? Like maybe you decided to run a marathon because somebody you know has cancer and you wanted to raise money for that, and you're like that's going to be really hard to do, but it matters. Humans are incredibly good at doing hard things when they matter. So what actually matters to you? And if you can be clear on that, then in this moment, when you start to feel your blood boiling, you go, wait, there's something that matters more. That's going to give you the lever to move this whole situation and move yourself.
That's good. I've often felt, and I've tried, I mean, once again, on my worst days, I struggle with this, but I know it's going to be a difficult conversation, but one of my goals is the relationship is no worse after we have this difficult conversation. So whether it's with my wife, with my children, with a colleague, a client, it might be a difficult conversation, but the relationship is no worse. And I feel like there's an element of give to that, in that something, we're not compromising on the issues. We're not fleeing necessarily, but going about it. The give allows us to go about it because we have a stronger idea of the why for the how, right? Is that along the lines?
Yeah. And I think a lot of us talk about purpose in business, but like, how do we use that purpose? If I really feel a sense of purpose, how do I use that in the day to day?
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is we get something other than what we really want. You know, when we're in those reactions, we often get the opposite of what we want. And so this may be just, how do you get what you truly want? How you get what you truly want? Well, first pay attention to what you truly want. And then notice when you've got signals that are, you might be moving away from that, and stop and redirect towards what you truly want.
Yeah.
Now, I've never met anybody who, when they really thought about what they truly wanted, I've never met anybody who's like, what I truly want is just to decimate that person and put them in their place and stomp them into
Sabotage the
dust.
project. And,
Right. What I truly want is for us to all be able to work together and, make things work better. What I truly want is, this project we're working on can make a difference in people's lives. I want to make that difference. What I truly want is to be a trustworthy and trusted ally to the people that I support. What I truly want at the end of the day is to be a good human being.
Right.
And I think a lot of times in my life before I started learning this, I would look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day, and particularly as a father, saying, I was not the dad today that I really want to be. And I know anybody, I think we've all had this experience. Maybe I'm alone in it, but that's not a great moment. And, let's have less of those moments and more of the moments where it's like, yeah, that was tough, but I showed up as who I really want to be. I showed up as the version of myself that is the better me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you kind of went there, because I've got one last question, and all of our focus really has been on the workplace. But you have an entire appendix in the book that applies emotional intelligence to parenting. And I got a kick out of it. You said, if I remember right, you thought you were pretty good at emotional intelligence, and then you had children, right? Yeah. So what's an example of how emotional intelligence and your model can apply at home? I know this could be a whole separate episode, but just what are a couple ideas that come to mind?
Well, you mentioned having a 14-year-old. I remember when my son was 15 and we were getting into some really deep waters and conflict, and found myself really volatile. And there were just so many moments where I was reacting. And then he was reacting. And I would, and even when he was younger, we certainly had some before then too. But these places where, the conversation just doesn't go well and we both end up really upset. I think there are just a million opportunities every day, especially as parents, where we think, I have a goal here. of this person being a healthy, independent, competent human being in a few years. And in this moment, how can we work towards that? And the answer isn't, I'm going to yell at you and send you to your room. At the end of the day, that's unlikely. The sending to your room might be helpful, but the drama before that is unlikely to be all that helpful.
Put the foot down. Yeah. Yeah. I love that chapter, by the way. And you actually, I don't remember if you stated it or if implied it. You have a separate book on the topic, I seem to recall.
Yeah,
Right?
I ended up writing another book about parenting. And it's mostly the things that I did wrong as a parent. But it boils down to the same 3 steps, right? Know yourself, noticing, oh, okay, I am reacting, something's going on, I'm feeling something. I have options. I might want to do my usual thing, but I actually have options. What's truly important? And these 3 questions, what am I feeling? What are my options? What do I really want? In any relationship, at work, at home, anywhere in between, these 3 questions, just keep asking yourself over and over. And, there's a lot more to learn about this, but what I think is important is it's easy to practice. You just got it. I don't know how long this has been, but it's not like we took this big theoretical expedition, right? It's a really easy idea. Emotions are there for a reason. Let me tune into them. Let me stop reacting and step forward on purpose. Done. Now, just practice for the next rest of your life, and it'll all be good.
That's good. It's a great place to wrap it up there, Josh. For those listening, that emotional intelligence is important, right? You know that, but what's often missing is the how. How do we do this? And that's exactly what Josh Friedman shares in his 4th edition of his best-selling book, At the Heart of Leadership. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Joshua, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everyone.